Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all our listeners. I hope you are all doing well and staying resilient in these turbulent times. Before we begin, I want you to take a moment and look around you. Look at the walls of your home, the desk where you work, or even the frame of the window you are looking through for generations. That would represented the ultimate stability of the American life, but today that stability is splintering. Have you felt the shift in the air? The sense that the basic building blocks of our society are suddenly being pulled out from under us? This is the visual that is haunting the construction sites of America this morning. If you walk past a suburban development in Florida or a skyscraper project in Seattle, you will see something terrifyingly quiet: silence. The saws have stopped, the cranes are frozen like giant yellow vultures over an unfinished dream as of this hour. The trade relationship between the United States and Canada hasn't just soured. It has detonated. Canada has just slammed the US with record lumber prices, and the shockwaves are triggering a level of chaos we haven't seen since the Great Depression. This isn't just about wood. It's about the collapse of the American dream in real time. For decades, we took for granted the cheap flow of timber from the north. We built our empires on the back of Canadian forests, believing the supply was infinite and the price was fixed. That era is over. This is a fiscal earthquake, a timber war that is forcing the US economy to its knees, and Washington has no plan to stop the bleeding. Before we dive into the dark numbers of this collapse, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. In a world of economic deception, staying informed is your only defense against the coming storm. Now let us look at the crater this crisis is leaving in our backyard and why your financial future might be at stake. We are entering uncharted waters where the very material of our lives has become a weapon of war. The silence on the construction sites is the loudest warning we have ever received, and it is telling us that the foundation is rotting. To understand why your future home just became $50,000 more expensive overnight, we have to look at the cold, hard mechanics of this trade war with clinical precision. Canada, the world's largest exporter of softwood lumber, has just enacted a record-breaking tariff and price hike that analysts are calling an economic embargo in all but name. This move didn't happen in a vacuum. It is a calculated, strategic response to years of American protectionism, but the timing couldn't be more catastrophic. The U.S. housing market, already gasping for air under high interest rates, and a liquidity crisis, is now facing a supply shock that is essentially a death sentence for new construction and middle-class stability. When you analyze the flow of commodities through the lens of global finance, you see a pattern of retaliation that mirrors the oil shocks of the 70s. Canada isn't just selling wood anymore. They are leveraging a strategic asset to force Washington's hand in a much larger geopolitical game. But while the politicians argue in gilded rooms and exchange diplomatic memos, the American builder is left staring at invoices they cannot possibly pay. The price of lumber has surged past historic peaks, crossing a threshold that makes middle-class housing a mathematical impossibility for the average family. We are witnessing the deconstruction of the American suburbs. Construction companies are filing for bankruptcy at a rate that mirrors the 2008 crash, leaving behind half-finished skeletons of houses that may never be completed. The timber wall is real, and unlike a physical border, you can't climb over it. You can only go broke trying to pay for it. The psychological impact of seeing your dream home vanish behind a wall of rising costs is profound. It creates a sense of helplessness that ripples through the entire economy, from the hardware store owner to the young couple looking for their first apartment. We are seeing a total breakdown of the traditional supply chain, where the very resource we need most has been priced out of reach by our closest ally. This is not a market correction. It is a fundamental shift in the wealth of nations, and the United States is on the losing side of the ledger. History teaches us that when the cost of shelter becomes unreachable, the social contract begins to fray at the edges until the entire fabric of society is at risk. We have seen this before in the great economic shifts of the 20th century, but the speed of this current collapse is what is truly unprecedented and terrifying for anyone holding real estate assets. In the last 48 hours, major developers have pulled the plug on over 400,000 planned housing units across the Sun Belt and the Midwest. This is a massive contraction of wealth that will be felt for a decade. Think about the ripple effect. It's not just the lumber. It's the jobs, the local taxes, the schools, and the retail ecosystems that grow around new communities. When the wood stops flowing, the money stops moving. Washington is scrambling, but their tools are useless in the face of a resource deficit. You cannot print trees. You cannot solve a biological shortage with a Treasury memo or A digital injection of liquidity. The Canadian government's lumber slam is a masterclass in asymmetric economic warfare. They know the U.S. depends on their forests for 30% of its domestic needs. By choking that supply and spiking the price, they aren't just raising revenue. They are hijacking the American recovery and holding our domestic policy hostage. It is a strategic strike against the very heart of the U.S. gross domestic product. As we watch the stock prices of home builders plummet into the red, we have to ask ourselves, is this a temporary glitch, or are we watching the final days of the United States as a dominant, self-sufficient economic power? The reality on the ground is grim, and the chaos mentioned in today's headlines is just the surface of a much deeper structural failure. We are looking at a future where owning a wooden structure becomes a sign of extreme wealth, leaving the rest of the population in a permanent state of rental insecurity. The implications for the American family are devastating, as the ladder to the middle class is literally being dismantled board by board. Let's talk about the human cost, because finance is ultimately about people and the lives they build. For a young couple in Ohio or a veteran in Texas trying to use a VA loan, these record prices aren't just market volatility, they are the cold-blooded theft of a future. When Canada raises the price of lumber by 40% in a single quarter, that cost is passed directly to the consumer at the end of the line. But the American consumer is already tapped out, exhausted by inflation and stagnant wages. We are entering a foreclosure of the future. The American dream was built on the idea that if you worked hard and played by the rules, you could own a piece of the earth and a home to call your own. Today, that piece of earth comes with a wooden frame that now costs more than the land itself in many parts of the country. This is where the machine learning analysis of historical crises becomes vital to our understanding. We see the same markers of the 1970s stagflation, but with a modern, globalized twist that makes it much harder to escape. The U.S. is being outmaneuvered by its closest neighbor in a game of resource chess. While our leaders were focused on internal political wars and social media theater, our primary resource pipeline was being turned into a noose. Washington's scramble is a display of pure, unadulterated panic. The Department of Commerce is issuing frantic statements, and the White House is begging for a dialogue, but Canada has all the leverage. They have the wood, and the world, specifically China and the European Union, is more than willing to pay their premium price. The U.S. is no longer the preferred customer. We are the desperate ones, standing at the back of the line with an empty wallet and a failing currency. This shift in status is a bitter pill for a superpower to swallow, but the market doesn't care about national pride. It only cares about who has the goods, and right now, the goods are across the border, locked behind a record-breaking price tag. In the world of high-stakes documentarian finance, we call this the resource trap. It is a state of dependency that leaves a nation vulnerable to the whims of its suppliers. The U.S. has allowed its own domestic timber industry to be strangled by overregulation, environmental lawsuits, and a lack of technological investment, creating a dangerous and unnecessary dependency on foreign imports. Now, the bill for that neglect has come due, and it is a price we cannot afford to pay. The record lumber prices are triggering a domino effect through the entire supply chain that is breathtaking in its scope. It starts with the forest in British Columbia, moves to the mill, hits the shipping lanes, and ends with a construction halted sign on a half-finished house in a small American town. But it doesn't stop there. When housing stops, the banking sector feels the heat almost immediately. Mortgage applications are drying up because there is nothing left to buy that is affordable for the average earner. We are looking at a paralyzed real estate market that could lead to a systemic banking crisis. The Greenland deal hoaxes and the political theater of the day are nothing more than distractions from this fundamental truth. A nation that cannot house its people at a reasonable cost is a nation in decline. The chaos in Washington isn't just about bad policy. It's about a total loss of control over the basic elements of survival. We are seeing a historic shift in the balance of power in North America. Canada has realized that in the 21st century, commodities are more powerful than aircraft carriers. This is a Cold War fought with pine and cedar, and currently the United States is losing ground every single day. The structural integrity of our economy is being tested, and we are finding that the wood we used to build it is no longer within our grasp. If you look at the data coming out of the Federal Reserve this morning, the inflation they promised was transitory is now being cemented by these lumber prices into a permanent reality. This is cost-push inflation at its most violent and disruptive. Every school, every hospital, and every affordable housing project funded by your tax dollars is now over budget by millions of dollars. This creates a fiscal black hole that the government is trying to fill with more debt, further devaluing the currency you hold in your pocket, but you cannot borrow your way out of a physical shortage. The U.S. lumber industry is trying to ramp up production, but you cannot grow a forest in a week, and you cannot build a sawmill overnight. We are facing a 3 to 5 year gap where the American construction industry will be entirely at the mercy of Canadian trade whims and export taxes. This is the Davos disaster on a local, personal scale for every citizen. While globalists talk about the Great Reset and a digital future, the average American is seeing their net worth evaporate as the cost of living outpaces their wages at a staggering, unsustainable rate. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. When the symbols of stability, the home, the white picket fence, the safe neighborhood become symbols of a vanished past, the social fabric begins to tear in ways that are hard to repair. We are seeing protests at state capitals and a growing, seething resentment toward a government that seems more interested in foreign conflicts and ideological battles than the price of a 2x4 in a local hardware store. The disconnect between the ruling class and the reality of the lumberyard has never been wider or more dangerous for the future of the Union. What comes next is the scramble, a desperate period of searching for alternatives in a world that is increasingly hoarding its resources. Washington is looking for loopholes, trying to source lumber from Brazil, Europe, or even Russia through back channels, but the logistics are a nightmare and the quality is dangerously inconsistent. With American building codes, there is no easy fix for a problem decades in the making. The Made in America movement is hitting the hard reality that we don't have enough sawmills or loggers left to meet the demand of a hungry nation. This is the result of decades of offshoring and the neglect of our own natural resources. We are watching the dismantling of an empire from the inside out, triggered by something as simple and fundamental as wood. As the prices hit another record high this afternoon, the bond market is starting to react with extreme volatility. Investors are pulling back from anything related to real estate or consumer credit, sensing that the housing bubble 2.0 hasn't just popped, it has been incinerated by the high cost of materials. The chaos is spreading to the labor market at lightning speed. Hundreds of thousands of carpenters, electricians, and plumbers are facing layoffs as projects are canceled and contracts are torn up. This is a systemic failure that threatens to pull the entire economy into a deep recession. The U.S. is not just collapsing in a dramatic explosion that makes for a good movie. It is eroding piece by piece, board by board, until there is nothing left to hold up the structure. The record prices are the fever, but the dependency is the underlying disease that we have ignored for far too long. And as of now, there is no doctor in Washington with the courage to prescribe the cure. As we close this investigative report, we have to face the cold reality that the world we knew is changing permanently. The relationship between the United States and Canada will never be the same after this lumber slam. We are entering a dark era of resource nationalism, where even the friendliest neighbors will use every weapon in their arsenal to protect their own interests and leverage their assets. The U.S. must rebuild its industrial base and reclaim its resource independence. But that is a journey of 1,000 miles, and we haven't even taken the first step toward the forest. For those of you watching this, I urge you to stay safe, stay liquid, and understand that the roof over your head is now one of the most valuable and precarious assets on the planet. Don't wait for the mainstream media to tell you the truth when it is already too late to act. They are too busy with the distraction of the week to notice the foundations are being sold off. Look at the lumber yards in your town. Look at the silent cranes on the horizon. The evidence of the collapse is all around us if we only have the courage to see it. Thank you for staying with us through this deep dive into the timber war. If this analysis helped you understand the chaos a little better, please share it with someone who needs to hear the truth. Remember, in a collapsing economy, knowledge and preparation are the only things they can't take away from you. We will be monitoring the situation at the border and the New York commodity markets closely for any sign of a break in the clouds. Until next time, keep your eyes open, your foundation strong, and your spirit resilient. We are in this together, and we will continue to bring you the truth that the system wants to hide. Goodbye for now, and take care of your families.